let's investigate one of the most famous, seemingly chaotic climaxes in all of literature. We're talking about the burning of Thornfield Hall in Jane Eyre. But we're not going to look at this as just some random tragic accident. No, we need to treat it as a highly suspicious event.
To do that, we're basically going to treat this whole thing like a forensic investigation. We'll sift through the ashes to find the authorial mastermind pulling the strings behind the scenes. Was this actually a tragic twist of fate, or something much more calculated?
There's this massive gap between how we emotionally experience the scene and the cold, hard mechanics of its design. As a reader, you're supposed to feel like this fire is a completely random, purifying disaster that just upends everything. But the reality? When you really break it down, it's a meticulously tailored plot device built to fix a very specific set of problems.
Here's our investigation docket for this explainer. First, the tailored disaster. Then, suspiciously perfect timing, convenient medical miracles, the heroism contradiction, and finally, the ashes of bigamy.
Section 1. The tailored disaster. Examining the crime scene.
Let's look at the immediate aftermath, the raw facts of the event. Thornfield Hall burns absolutely to the ground. Bertha Mason, the hidden wife, dies in the flames, and Edward Rochester survives, but he's blinded and loses a hand. Now, on the surface, this feels like total destruction, a chaotic twist of fate. But as we'll see, every single detail here was carefully prescribed. Section 2. Suspiciously perfect timing. A train on a schedule. Think about Jane's timeline right before the fire. Day 1, she flees Thornfield completely alone, penniless, totally vulnerable. A few weeks later, she's barely surviving out on the moors. Months pass, she miraculously finds wealthy cousins. And then, a full year later, she inherits a staggering 20,000 pounds. And exactly as that happens, boom, the fire strikes. Notice how it totally holds off when she's weak? It waits patiently until she's wealthy, independent, and ready to return to Rochester as a total equal. The conclusion here is pretty inescapable. This isn't reality. It's narrative engineering. The disaster arrives exactly on schedule, like a highly punctual train, proving we're looking at the blueprints of a hyper-calculated plot, definitely not a random act of nature.
Section 3. Convenient medical miracles. The anatomy of a prescription.
Let's reopen the case file and take a clinical look at Rochester's injuries. When you inject a little dry medical reality into the mix, it's wild how mathematically perfect his wounds are. In the real world, massive falling beams crush entire bodies indiscriminately, but in Bronte's reality, a beam selectively crushes exactly one hand, just badly enough to need amputation, and causes blindness. Real burns cause permanent trauma, but Rochester, he gets a slow return of sight that honestly acts more like reversible cataracts than catastrophic fire damage.
And why is that? Well, because medical accuracy is tossed out for thematic convenience. His injuries are just serious enough to make him pitiable, but absolutely not severe enough to make him repulsive to Jane. He perfectly needs a nurse, he perfectly needs eyes, and he perfectly needs a right hand. It's a highly customized void that literally only Jane is allowed to fill.
Just think about the number 1. That is the exact number of sons born before his traumatic injury miraculously reverses just enough to let him see his first child's face. It's a beautifully prescribed sentence of punishment that effortlessly pivots right into a deeply emotional, perfectly timed, happy ending.
Section 4. The heroism contradiction. Profiling the suspect.
Let's profile our prime suspect here. Before the flames even sparked, what was the actual state of Rochester's marriage? Well, he hated Bertha. He openly called her a depraved animal, and he explicitly wished she would die. We really have to keep those true feelings in mind. He absolutely despised his wife and wanted this massive legal obstacle out of his life.
I mean, he literally admits at one point, "The damp walls might soon have relieved me of her." That is a damning quote. This is a guy already actively considering indirect murder, hoping the dampness of the house would just make her sick enough to die.
So we have to ask ourselves this critical question. Would a man who loathes his wife that much, a guy hoping the damp walls kill her, actually risk burning alive to pull her to safety? It creates this massive cognitive dissonance. Are we really supposed to believe he'd suddenly scale a burning roof to save his biggest burden? Psychologically speaking, he'd probably welcome the fire as the ultimate solution to his problem.
But the novel simply cannot allow that. It needs him to be redeemed. So it relies on this twisted logic. He tried, he failed, therefore he's a hero. It totally abandons believable psychology right here just to give Rochester his moment of redemption, so Jane, and you the reader, can forgive him.
Section 5. The Ashes of Bigamy, the Blueprint Revealed.
Let's wrap up our investigation by looking at what this fiery climax actually accomplished. Because honestly, it's an incredibly efficient tool. In one single stroke, it solves every narrative problem. It completely removes the legal obstacle of Bertha. It punishes Rochester without actually killing him. It creates a physical need that only Jane can fill. And finally, it washes away the ugly sin of bigamy with a supposedly clean flame of heroic sacrifice.
But if you look closely at those ashes, the truth is right there. The sin remains. The law was ignored, and the crime was still attempted. Despite the purifying flames and that whole heroic rescue attempt, his actual willingness to trick Jane into a fake marriage is an undeniable fact. The fire was just a highly convenient way to wipe the slate clean.
Which leaves us with this. What happens to the illusion of redemption when a miraculous inheritance turns a survivor into a saint? Understanding these hidden blueprints really changes how we consume romantic tropes today. Does this happy ending feel genuinely earned to you, or is it just the ultimate piece of narrative engineering to wrap up a toxic romance? We are going to unpack that exact question in our next explainer. Until then, keep digging, and I'll see you next time.